have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and said to him, Thus says the Lord, or thus says Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country, and they shall cover the face of the land, so that no one can see the land, and they shall eat what is left to you after the hail, and they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field. And they shall fill your houses, and the houses of your servants, and all of the Egyptians, as neither you or neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day that they came on this earth to this day. Then he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh's servant said to him, How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve Yahweh their God. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined? So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh and said to them, Go, serve the Lord your God, but which ones are to go? Moses said, We will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and our herds, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. But he said to them, The Lord be with you if I ever let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No. Go, the men among you, and serve the Lord, for that is what you are asking. And then they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt, for the locusts, so that they shall come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every plant in all the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon all the land, all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts came up upon all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt, such a dense swarm of locusts as had never been before, nor ever will be again. They covered the face of the whole land, so that the land was darkened. They ate all of the plants in the land, all of the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against Yahweh your God and against you. Now therefore forgive my sin, please, only this once, and plead with Yahweh your God to remove this death from me. So he went out from Pharaoh and pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord turned the wind into a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people go. Well, that was a mouthful. So, what we see in chapter 10, or here, the 8th plague, being that middle plague in each triad, the plague that came with a warning. The Lord gave Pharaoh and Pharaoh's people a warning that if they did not let the Hebrews go, tomorrow, following that theme that Pharaoh set, tomorrow Yahweh would bring these locusts in. Now, I think it's interesting to look at the amount of time or amount of text, if you will, that Moses gave to the 8th plague. Aside from the 10th plague, no other plague gets the amount of words describing it that the 8th plague does. Now, why? Specifically, it's a great heightening, if you will. The plague of hail was devastating, but they survived. This plague really begins to round the corner, if you will, to the end of the end for the Egyptians. So, looking at exactly what the Lord does here. So, a little bit of recap. First, we know the water's already been turned to blood. The land's been filled with frogs. They're now dead frogs. Gnats have covered the land. Flies have swarmed over the land. Okay, all of the livestock in the field have already died, so there's no livestock that were left in the field for that plague. Okay, all of the Egyptians have now been covered with, boils and have been incapacitated. Then a thunderstorm like no other has struck the land of Egypt. Hail and lightning has rained down from heaven. So at this point, most of the animals have died from the death of the livestock. Any that didn't die were struck down in the field, along with the servants in the fields. All of the plants up until this point that had sprouted were struck by hail, and any trees that remained were already damaged. So the economy, the animals, the plants, the water, the fish in the Nile, all of these points of economy have been struck. Egypt truly is on the brink of, absolute ruin. And that's what we see here in verse 7, is that Pharaoh's servants, basically have to go up against Pharaoh and tell him, how long are you going to let this be a snare to us? Egypt is ruined. Well, what they don't realize is it's about to be more ruined, because the plague of locust, if you will, is the final economic nightmare, if you will. So the 8th plague, the tier 1 plagues, if you will, so 1 through 3, are showing the Lord's power, but not that long term. Just plagues 4 through 6, strengthening the Lord, beginning to have a longer term effect. But then when we get to the 3rd tier, so 7, 8, 9, you have long-lasting major implications for the country of Egypt. The Lord has continuously been, heightening the danger level, if you will, heightening the effect. So with this one, we see specifically what Moses says is going to happen. He doesn't just tell them locusts are going to come upon the land. He tells them locusts are going to come upon the land and what exactly they're going to do. First off, in verse 14, we're told that it will be a swarm that will cover the entirety of the land, like they, nor their fathers, nor their grandfathers have ever seen. And we're told in verse 15 that they covered the whole face of the land so that the land was darkened. They ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. Now, I want to look back just a little bit at the 7th plague, the plague of hail. Let's see here. Because if you remember, let's see here. Trying to find the verse. So in verse 30 of chapter 9, we see regarding the plague of hail, but as for you and your servants, I know that you do not fear the Lord. The flax and barley were struck down, for the barley was in ear, and the flax was in bud, but the wheat and the emmer were not struck down, for they were late in coming up. So we know that the last plague took out half of the main crops, but still left a second wave of crops, if you will, in the ground because they hadn't yet sprouted. So while we do not know how much time elapsed between plague number 7 and plague number 8, we do know that in plague number 7 that they hadn't sprouted yet, but that the 2 crops that were grown were nearing the end of their harvest cycle. So when the 8th plague comes around, and it says specifically, I believe, that it's there to eat every green thing, well, I believe it's indicating there that wheat and emmer crops have now sprouted, because when wheat comes up, it's a beautiful verdant green field. So there's been at least enough time there that the economic, parachute, if you will, left through the plague of hail is about to be wiped out as well. Not only have the livestock now died, the crops now been struck, all the trees are taken down, so the pomegranates, the date palms, the bananas, all the other things that were growing. But now we see that this plague of locusts is coming in, so it's not only going to eat the trees, which is left, eat all the fruit, but also is going to consume the grain that has now sprouted. So, verse 15, back in chapter 10, they covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened. I think that's, again, prelude to what's about to happen. If you want to picture the 10 plagues as a light scale, it goes from light to darkest. You say, well, the 9th plague is total darkness. Yes, but the death of the firstborn is even darker than total darkness. So you see that reduction from the prime of Egypt to the ruin of Egypt throughout the plagues. And each one sort of has a hint of that. And they ate all the plants in the land, and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. And then in verse 16, we see this is the first time that Pharaoh responds this way. Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron, I have sinned against Yahweh your God and against you. So this is a transition there. At this point, we see, one, Pharaoh wasted no time to call back in the prophet of Yahweh, Moses and Aaron. We also see that he's now addressing the fact that he has sinned against Moses and Aaron, because effectively he insults them and kicks them out after the last plague. It is effectively what happened. So the very thing that Yahweh predicted and told Moses would come to pass, that Moses would be as God and Aaron his prophet to Pharaoh, is being fulfilled in this verse. Pharaoh at this point is beginning to revere Moses as God, or as God's direct representative. We see that because now he's addressing Moses, I have sinned against you, and he's asking Moses, please forgive my sin only this once, and plead with the Lord. So that elevation of Moses in Pharaoh's eyes that Yahweh promised would happen is now happening. So, and then I think in verse 17, even though this is happening, we still see the hardness of Pharaoh's heart on the flip side of the coin, because he says, now, therefore, please forgive my sins, please only this once, and plead with the Lord your God to remove this debt from me. So even though he's hastily pleading with Moses and Aaron, he's still to the point of, only this once more, give me one more favor. He's still bargaining with the Lord, if you will. So he went out from Pharaoh and pleaded with Yahweh, and the Lord turned the wind into a very strong west wind, which lifted the locust and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go. So the very thing as well that the Lord has already prophesied would happen, that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened, continues to happen. But I think we also see a precursor here in that Pharaoh calls the locust a death upon him, but then the wind changes and all the locusts are driven into the sea so that not one remains in the land of Egypt. I think there's actually a little bit of parallel and symbology going on there, that in the not too distant future, the true death in the land of Egypt, i.e. the armies of Pharaoh and the oppressive forces, will themselves be driven into the sea, all to die, and none be left in the land of Egypt. So, as usual, the Lord is his normal poetic self here and is laying plot points to show his glory, that even in these lesser plagues, not that this is a lesser plague, but in the broad spectrum of what he's doing, there is a crescendo building. The themes are building. So at the end, the locusts come. We don't know how long they were in the land of Egypt, but given that Pharaoh hastily called Moses and to plead with them right then and there, we can say that they likely weren't all that long. So we don't know that every single piece of food was consumed. I think Pharaoh at least got the idea pretty quickly that this was going to be a real problem if it persisted. But we do know that it was enough that Pharaoh seeks Moses to plead for him, and then, of course, hardens his heart and doesn't let the people go. So, on to verse 21. This is the 9th plague. So this is the final plague of the third triad of plagues, and the final plague in what I would call the prologue. Yes, Gigi?
I have a question about, did the locusts go to Goshen also? Because in the hail, they were spared from the hail.
So, the text in this case doesn't specifically say that it was spared from Goshen. It does say all the land of Egypt, but previous, all of the text, starting in the 4th plague onward, the plagues have been spared, and we know that the 9th plague will be separated. So I believe when it's saying all the land of Egypt there, it's using it in the same consistent manner that it has been using it to refer to the land of the Egyptians, not necessarily to the entire kingdom of Egypt, which 1/3 of is occupied by the Hebrews in Goshen, if that makes sense. I think Moses is just using the same phrase there to show all the land of the Egyptians. But good question. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Justin,
Any other questions on Plague 8? Yes. Oh, there you go, Philip. Sorry, I can't see you over there, Philip, so...
Yeah, I'm raising my hand. I don't know. I mean, I'm out of the camera here. But anyway, no, so I think that's a valid reading of the text, and, you may be, you're probably right. I was just thinking, on the other hand, if there wasn't a distinction and the locusts did indeed devour all the plant life in Goshen, the Israelites are about to be gone from there anyway, and a plague, then the Egyptians are going to want to get to it quickly. So I don't know. Again, you're probably right to read the whole.
No, I mean, and point that if the Lord is punishing Egypt, the Hebrews are about to be gone. At this point, so why would he leave bountiful crops growing in Goshen for the Egyptians to be able to loot afterwards? So it's hard to say, Gigi. We do know that the Hebrews would not have been near as affected by the plague of the locust, as they ate more of the livestock as well as had grain reserves. The economy of Egypt proper was almost completely vegetarian, or at least mostly vegetarian. So the effect would have been far greater on the grain-producing and the grain-consuming diets of the native Egyptians. It's not that they didn't eat grain in Goshen, they did, but they were also the slaves, so they were eating the leftovers anyway. So either way you read it, it's a devastating plague on Egypt. So, and I think there's validity to both those ways of looking at it. So, any other questions on the 8th plague? Okay. Then in verse 29, I'll start reading again. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand towards heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all of the people of Israel had light where they lived. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go, serve Yahweh, your little ones also may go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind." But Moses said, "You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God. Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take them to serve the Lord our God. And we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get away from me, take care to never see my face again, for on that day you shall see my face, you shall die." Moses said, "As you say, I will not see your face again." So, in the 9th plague, this is the capstone, if you will, to the striking of Egypt proper, the entire socioeconomic, and I didn't cover it in the 8th plague, but I'll mention it. The 8th plague of locust actually struck against the Egyptian god Set, their god of the desert, and of locust and chaos. as he was supposed to cause chaos on their enemies and not allow it in Egypt. Obviously, he was powerless. And then this is the capstone, if you will, against the Egyptian pantheon, as throughout all of Egyptian history, Ra, or partially Amun-Ra, their sun god, is their chief deity. So the entirety, every aspect of Egyptian life was based around the solar cycle of the sun coming up in the morning and the sun setting in the evening and then repeating. So for the sun to not rise for 3 days and to be in utter and total darkness would have just, I mean, it's the final blow to the Egyptian gods. Even their chief deity, their chief protector god, cannot do anything against this foreign desert god, if you will, this foreign god of the Hebrews. Because remember, we have to look at it from the Egyptian perspective. They probably are not yet monotheistic. They might get the picture after the final plague, but at this point, they're saying, okay, our gods must still be there, but they're clearly not near as powerful as this other god. So, and this is actually a proper way to read it throughout much of the dealings with pagans, throughout the entirety of the Old Testament, is they continuously view Yahweh as just another god, and he's constantly reminding them and showing them, no, there is no other god besides me. He's constantly proving that the false pantheons of the pagans are nothing more than demons at best, and figments of men's imagination at worst. So this 9th plague strikes at Ra, okay, totally annihilates their sun god, as he can do nothing to make his sun rise in the morning when Yahweh commands darkness. We see there that there was light in Goshen. You see that separation. So we don't know what caused the darkness. It could just simply be divine darkness, just as let there be light was light without a sunshine. There can be darkness in spite of a sunshine. It's clearly a divine judgment upon them, upon Egypt, and yet the children of Israel are spared in this case. Pharaoh then calls Moses for the final time, tells them to go, take the kids, but leave the livestock. And Moses retorts with, I think, a rather funny and ironic statement saying, well, we can't just leave the livestock because we don't actually know what we're going to need till we get there. Which is true. Yahweh hasn't told them what they're going to have to do. I just think a proper reading of the text at this point is a little bit of humor added in. In Moses' retort to Pharaoh. And of course, Pharaoh is upset at this. The Lord's continuing to harden his heart. He will not let them go. And then Pharaoh issues a prophecy, he thinks, regarding Moses' death, and the death, if you will, of the entire conflict here. As Pharaoh says, get away, take care, never to see my face again, for on that day you see my face, you shall die. Moses said, as you say, I will not see your face again. And I do want to unpack that a little bit. So first off, Pharaoh is, in this instance, continuing to act as the superior. We know throughout both Hebrew culture as well as the entirety of world history, the superior always issues commands or statements to the inferior. Throughout this entire narrative so far, it's been Moses declaring to Pharaoh what is about to happen. Well, in this last instance here, Pharaoh attempts to re-exert that dominance, if you will, and declares to Moses, take care that you never see my face again, for on that day you shall see my face, you shall die. Effectively, Pharaoh's trying to save face, pun intended, here, because his people are in ruin. His guards, can do nothing about it. Up until this point, he has, as Pharaoh, has let this wild prophet of some foreign god walk right into the capital and tell Pharaoh exactly what's going to happen, and Pharaoh's been powerless to do anything about it. You can't help but think how the nobles and the politicians and the courtiers in the court have probably lost a little confidence in Pharaoh by this point. not to mention they have lost all of their material possessions through the series of plagues. So in this last bit, if you will, Pharaoh attempts to, exert dominance here, and declares that the next time, not now, mind you, if Pharaoh had wanted to kill Moses or honestly thought he could kill Moses, he would have just done it then and there. Moses is standing in front of him. Why wait for another plague? Except for that Pharaoh can't kill Moses and was afraid to kill Moses and couldn't kill Moses. So instead he simply threatens, the next time you see my face, you shall die. Now, that's the first part of that, is that the human interaction there. But actually, Pharaoh is in a reverse form of symbology, if you will. Think back to how, when we first started this, I mentioned that the entire narrative is a fight of the house of Yahweh versus the house of Pharaoh. Okay, so Yahweh is the invading, conquering Lord, taking the possession of the Israelites from Pharaoh's hand. It goes hand in hand, pun intended, with the serve worship verb that we see used throughout the text. Okay, so if we think forward to Deuteronomy, we actually get the Aaronic blessing later on, where the Lord declares, "May my face shine upon you, and be gracious to you," declaring life. Well, in this case, you actually have Pharaoh in the opposing position, declaring a malediction upon Moses. Okay, and it's interesting to see how the wording there actually is almost a reversal. Get away from me, so instead of drawing near, get away. Take care to never see my face, for on the day you shall see it, you shall die. So Pharaoh is, without realizing that would be the case, playing the final card and solidifying his identity as the opposition in this narrative. It's almost like how often the Lord, to show his glory, sets up an enemy, if you will, or allows a king to rise and allows them to have false pretenses, only for the Lord's truth to come in and completely shatter that false pretense. You see it later on with Nebuchadnezzar and the greatness there, and yet the Lord humbles him and turns him to an animal for 7 years. So it's the same idea here that Pharaoh is attempting to pronounce a malediction or a curse, which is a position the greater must do to the lesser, and in a sense he's still claiming that divine right of Pharaoh. There's still an aspect of the belief there that Pharaoh is the divine incarnate son of Ra in Egypt as the divine ruler. And yet Moses responds, "As you say, I will not see your face again." So Moses is basically ignoring the first part and retorting to Pharaoh that, "As you have declared, I will not see you again." Now, I don't know, as the text doesn't tell us, but if you were a politician and a noble in the court, I don't know that statement would actually strike you with joy. Because while Moses has been bringing plagues upon the people, he's also the only thing that has alleviated each of the plagues. So, if you were an Egyptian, you either want Pharaoh to actually kill this annoying prophet of some foreign god, or you want Pharaoh to capitulate and give in to this prophet, therefore to stop the burdens. But the last thing you actually want is for this prophet to walk out unfettered and unhindered, free to levy another plague upon your people, and then have him declare that I will never see you again. This actually is a very foreboding and ominous final words from Moses here. And it actually, I think, properly would have struck terror into the people hearing it. Because up until this point, Moses has been there to provide relief, even though Moses is bringing forth the judgment on behalf of Yahweh. So at this point, he's declaring no more of that, no more mercy. The point of mediation is cut off. And I think it's important to stress that just as the Exodus is a microcosm of what happens in the full divine narrative of redemption, there will come a point where mediation is cut off and there only remains divine judgment. Just as there was for the Egyptians, there will be one day for all of the pagans and all the unbelievers out there that are hardening their heart against Yahweh. Up until this point, there's been 9 points of, preliminary judgment and preliminary mercy. This back and forth, judgment, mercy cycle. 3 different sets, each heightening, each trying, the Lord's giving a bigger case, if you will, a greater case for belief, and the Egyptians continue to harden their hearts. And at this point, Pharaoh says, or Moses says to Pharaoh, "You will not see me again." And I think it brings to mind the idea there, later on we see in the New Testament, and we're told, which is actually a quotation of what's going to happen later on. Today's the day of salvation. Don't harden your heart. And later on, that's speaking there of the Israelites who wanted to turn back to Egypt. But there is a point where mercy is cut off, and I think that's arguably the greatest important part of the first 9 plagues. There is that even though each one of them was a horrendous and terrible economic and physical judgment on Egypt, those who were still alive could still repent. The plague that's about to happen is no coming back. There is no coming back from. Now Pharaoh doesn't know this yet because, he should, as Moses told him at the very beginning, the words of the Lord saying, "If you don't release Israel, my firstborn, I will kill your firstborn." So we've had that looming in the background the whole time. Now Pharaoh clearly hasn't heeded it. So, in chapter 11, and I've got just a few minutes, but I think we can cover the prologue here to the Passover in chapter 11. So I'm going to read it. "And then Yahweh said to Moses," this is verse 1 of chapter 11, "Yet one more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and for gold jewelry. And Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people." Again, that's a direct fulfillment of that promise and prophecy Yahweh made to Moses, saying, "I will make you great in their sight. You will be as God to them, and Aaron as your prophet." So Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that Yahweh makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, Get out, you and all the people who follow you. And after that I will go out." And when he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger, then the Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt." Moses and Aaron did all the wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land. So, chapter 11 is basically that final dialogue, a final capstone to the first 9 plagues, which, while it was the power of Yahweh, were worked through Moses, his spokesperson. Starting in chapter 12 and the entirety of the Passover and the Exodus proper, we will see that Moses' role begins to diminish and Yahweh's direct role begins to increase. But in chapter 11, we see that Moses declares to Pharaoh, one more plague will be brought, and he continuously uses the first person singular pronoun. Yahweh is declaring, I will go out in the midst of Egypt. I will kill them. So let it be clear to all who hear, this isn't Moses inflicting this plague. This is none other than the same God who has spoken to Moses and who has brought by Moses these other plagues. Okay, so, and we'll see this starting probably next week when we start to work through the Passover and the actual account there. It is the Lord himself bringing judgment of his presence. And mind you, this is the presence without mediation. The presence of the Lord without proper mediation is only judgment to sinful man. And that is a true statement that rings true throughout all of history and for all of eternity. It is only when proper mediation has been made that the presence of Yahweh can be one of peace. And that's the entire point of the coming Passover. So, any questions on chapters, or plagues 9 and then the chapter 11 prologue and epilogue? Any questions? I don't see any hands. Come on, people. It's got to be a little more interesting than that. If not, well, I'll probably have you hand it off, and you can close my digital self down and go get some more coffee. Because I know what's on all of your minds.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks.
See you. I'll be back next week.
Thank you, Walter, for getting this out.